Okay, our realm today is Middle America. And you can see from this picture, this is a picture of a Maya ruin that you would find probably around the area of the Yucatan Peninsula. So the Maya civilization was one of the major early civilizations that existed in this realm. Here's the realm. You'll notice that the Middle America realm is south of the North American realm, which is the United States. And then you see it's north of the South American realm, and you see the countries of Colombia and Venezuela there on the bottom right-hand corner. You'll notice that this realm consists of Mexico and then the countries that we call Central America, and then it also consists of the island Caribbean nations, beginning with the Bahamas, Cuba, Haiti, and others. And so this is Middle America. Okay, the question is, why is it not called Latin America? It's very interesting that a lot of people call it Latin America, but it's not really a very accurate term. First off, you'll notice one of the key features here on my slideshow is that it's part of the Iberian heritage. The Iberian Peninsula is Spain, so you're going to see a major influence in this realm of Spain, but that's not the only influence, so therefore the term Latin is really not appropriate. There is a lot of cultural diversity in Middle America, and you'll notice that when you look at the realm that you have a lot of involvement by Africans, Asians, and other Europeans other than the Spanish. And the colonial powers, such as the European powers in particular, left a major imprint on the realm, and we'll talk about that. There are a variety of political structures you will find in this realm. There are some democracies, but there's still some military states, and there's a lot of poverty and a lot of political disruption. In terms of the American Indian impact, obviously we have two great Indian civilizations that made up the Middle America realm, the Aztec nation in Mexico and the Maya civilization that was in Mexico and in Guatemala. So Latin America is not appropriate, so we have to be very careful when we talk about Middle America. So this area is very physically divided and fragmented. So our realm consists of Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean islands. And it's called the mainland area and the rimland area, and we'll talk more about that as well. The major geographic qualities of Middle America, like I said, it's very fragmented, broken up physically with physical geography and politically. There's a lot of cultural diversity in the area because we have Native American influence, we have Spanish, we have African, we have Asian, and we have multiple European involvement. And so it's very complex there. Some of the regions and the subregions in Middle America are well developed economically, and some are not. Some are integrated into the world economy, and others remain on the outside of that. If we break Middle America into the regions, you'll notice that Mexico is a region in and of itself. Central America is considered a region, and the Greater and Lesser Antilles, which are the Caribbean islands, make up the third region of Middle America. In terms of physical geography, you'll notice that Middle America is a land bridge between the North American continent and the South American continent. And it consists of a number of islands, and we call those islands the Greater and Lesser Antilles. Due to the fact that this area is very volatile because of plate tectonics, you'll have a lot of natural hazards affecting this area: earthquakes, volcanoes, and hurricanes. So this is probably one of the more dangerous places to live. You'll notice the picture on my slideshow is a volcano overlooking a town in Guatemala, and the church on the left was damaged by an earthquake in 1976. And in many cases, these places are not repaired, and it's very dangerous living there. You never know when the volcanoes are going to go off again. Here's a map showing you the plate tectonic of the Middle America realm. You'll notice the plates that surround Middle America. Mexico in particular is on the North American plate, but Central America is on, part of it's on the Caribbean plate, and then you'll notice there's a plate right next to, on the western side of Mexico and Central America, called the Cocos Plate. So there's a lot of transitional areas there, making it very, very dangerous. This is the distribution of earthquakes and volcanoes, and you see the so-called ring of fire that makes up the area around the Pacific. But notice the little triangles, which are active volcanoes, and the little red dots, which indicate active earthquakes that occupy the Middle America realm. Pretty dangerous, wouldn't you think? Also, one thing that affects the Middle America realm is climate and weather, and this is obviously an area where hurricanes and typhoons track into the area, and you'll notice the lines coming out of the Atlantic Ocean and move toward the west and then the north and northeast. These are the tracks of the hurricanes, and these change periodically for a lot of reasons. Actually, there hasn't been as many hurricanes in this area as people have suggested. The global warming folks who have made the statement that the hurricanes are getting worse, that has not really happened. In many cases, the hurricanes are not as bad as everyone predicted they would be. So the global warming community hasn't been very correct on their predictions. But, that could change. Here's an example of a landslide, mudslide that existed after an earthquake in El Salvador in January 2001. You can see where those homes would have existed and where the mud covered them. So this is a very dangerous part of the world. As I stated, this is another cultural hearth. We've talked about these throughout the course. And a cultural hearth is a source area from which radiated ideas, innovations, and ideologies change the world. And so you'll notice in Middle America you have the Aztec and their cultural hearth in and around Mexico City. You can see that in purple on the map. And then you see the Maya, which is in the Yucatan Peninsula, and then down by Guatemala. This area is also known as Mesoamerica, and you can see here's another picture of an ancient pyramid that's been worked on. You'll notice the Maya civilization is the oldest in this area, around 3,000 years ago. The classic period is the time period in which the Maya were very powerful, and they lasted from around 200 to 900 AD. They existed in the nations of Honduras, Guatemala, and Belize, Yucatan Peninsula, and they ruled with a theocracy. They were a very religious group, believed in the sun god and the god of darkness, and so it's a very interesting religion. And they did human sacrifice, and they were pretty brutal. And for some reason, by the time the Europeans landed on the Yucatan Peninsula, the Maya was already declining. We don't know exactly why. The other Mesoamerican civilization were the Aztecs. They lived in and around Mexico City, and you see here some pictures of that. Around 1300 AD, and the capital city, which is now called Mexico City, at one time had over 100,000 people. Mexico City actually was a city in the middle of a lake, which you can see in the bottom picture. Now obviously that lake has been drained or dried up for now, but because of the old lake that used to be there, the ground in and around Mexico City is not as settled as it should be. Okay, one thing that you're going to learn about Middle America in your reading is the fact that it was colonized by Europe, and we know about that because obviously the Caribbean islands were colonized by Christopher Columbus in 1492. Remember, he was looking for the Spice Islands, and when he went west, he ran into the islands and not the Indies as he was planning on. And as a result of that, other Spanish and Portuguese nations explored the Middle America area, and the land was appropriated by these colonizers and taken away from the Indians, and they used it for commercial interests. And so what they did was they began to take over the land. Let's say in Mexico, Cortez defeated the Aztecs in around 1519, 1520, and he basically converted the land from crops for food to a cash cropping for export. And that's of course where they began to develop the type of crops that were necessary to raise money for the Spanish and the Portuguese empires. Unfortunately, when that happened, there was a land alienation that happened to the Native Americans living there, and this greatly affected the Native Americans, causing famine, poverty. Many of the Indians began to move from the area either up into North America or further into South America to get away from the Spaniards in particular. And it also began to decrease the diversity that they used to have for agriculture. And so this was a major problem. From this map, you'll notice the colonial spheres that I was talking about. The area in pink are the influence of the British, and you notice over British Honduras, parts of the Yucatan, Honduras, Nicaragua, Costa Rica. You can see the Spanish, obviously, in the kind of a goldish color. They were very influential, especially in Cuba, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico. Obviously, the Spanish had a major impact on Mexico and parts of Central America. But you'll notice the Dutch were there, especially in the islands, in the Lesser Antilles. You see that's kind of east of Puerto Rico. And then the French. You'll notice Guadeloupe, Martinique are other island nations that are French. And of course, Haiti is a French holding. Okay, once the Spaniards in particular began to colonize an area, they laid out the cities in a very idealized layout. And so you see a map picture over there to my right showing you the typical colonial Spanish town. They built with a city core, and from that core they started with the church being in the center, the government plaza, stores on the center, and then as they moved further and further out, they had the slaughterhouses and the farming areas. And so this was a very typical plaza central square idea, and you'll find this all through many of the Spanish towns and places in Mexico and in other Central American countries. Looks very similar to what you would find in Spain. Okay, so here are the two areas that you can identify and describe Middle America. Mainland Middle America, you'll notice is Mexico and Central America, and then you have the what we call Rimland area, which would include the Caribbean islands, but also the eastern coastal areas of some parts of Central America. You'll notice on the key down at the bottom left, it talks about in the color coding, it talks about the areas that were controlled by native tribes. The mestizo basically is the Mexican Indian mix of people, and you see where that is. And then you see the European sectors in color, and then the areas of a little brown is the black population. Primarily they were brought over as slaves for many of the cash crop situations like sugar production and things like that. And you can see the area in dark green. It says marked by U.S. influence, and then of course the northern European zones of the purple. So this was a pretty distinctive area. You can see from this slide, you can separate the mainland and Rimland in terms of the location. In the mainland, it was isolated. Rimland, obviously, surrounded by water. You had greater accessibility to ports. Climate primarily in the mainland area was highland climates, very cooler, which meant that also affected agriculture. The Rimland area was tropical, so therefore you have again agriculture more suited for that. Physiography in the mainland area, a lot of mountain systems. In the Rimland area, they're islands. There are some mountains on the islands because they're old volcanoes. The culture, mainland primarily European Indian. Obviously the Spanish were a major part there. You see the African involvement in some of the coastal areas. Primary race is mestizo. In the Rimland area, you'll find the Europeans were very predominant, and you have a white-black combination racial group, which is called mulatto. In terms of landholding patterns, in the mainland, they used the hacienda, and then in the Rimland area, they had plantations. So then, what is the difference between a hacienda and a plantation? A hacienda is a Spanish holding institution, a cattle farm, I guess. The purpose was land holding, not necessarily for making profit. Not very efficient, but the hacienda had a very high social prestige for the people that owned the property and lived there. The jobs were year-round, and many of the workers lived on the land and worked for the owner and received benefits by doing so. The farms were very self-sufficient, and if they did have any surplus, they were available for domestic market, and they can sell it to other people. You had diversified crops, yet they were grown on relatively small plots of land, so they did not produce a lot. On the other hand, the plantation was the production idea that was brought over from the Europeans. This is when they planted crops primarily for export. The key was to be very efficient in those crops, and they generally dealt with a single cash crop, maybe like coffee or sugar or beets or something of that nature, so that they could produce a lot of it and then be able to sell it and bring it back to Europe. The employment was rather seasonal, so once the season was over, then the employment would stop, which would be a problem for many of the natives that would want to work there. The purpose, obviously, of a plantation was profit, which meant they were very much associated with market prices based on what was in demand at the time. And if there was a low demand for a profit, if there was a low demand for a product, then the market would force them not to produce that as much, and therefore the farms would change a little bit. And of course, you would need a lot of capital and technology imported to make a plantation work. Okay, there you have a review of Middle America, and we look forward to the student presentation on Middle America.